Every morning at 7 a.m., he'd arrive in his Ford pickup, closing shop at 6 p.m. sharp. Everyone on Denver's streets knew him, but nobody really knew him. Until that day, when a customer spotted the faded Ranger tattoo on his arm during a shave and asked, "Is that from the 75th?" And for the first time, Tony stopped. Welcome to the Human Ledger, where we record the stories that matter most. Stories of silent heroes, forgotten legends, and the extraordinary people hiding in plain sight. Before we begin this powerful tale of hidden honor and unexpected mentorship, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe these forgotten legends deserve to be remembered, subscribe and help us keep their stories alive in the ledger of human greatness. Tony's barbershop stood on 32nd Avenue in Denver's Highlands neighborhood. Squeezed between weathered brick buildings, its faded storefront and half-broken neon sign made it blend into the urban landscape like camouflage. A small shop that looked frozen in the 1980s. Two ancient barber chairs with cracked leather, worn linoleum floors that had seen better decades, and yellowed newspaper clippings on the walls. But Tony had none of those personal touches that make a place feel lived in. No family pictures, no military memorabilia, no old buddy photos. No certificates or awards. Just mirrors that reflected nothing but the present moment. And the same professional tools he'd been using with surgical precision for 35 years. Tony Castellano was 67 but moved like a man in his 50s. Compact build, broad shoulders that still held their military bearing, and hands that never showed the slightest tremor. His speech was economical, voice low and measured. Customers would ramble about the Denver Broncos' latest season, Colorado's unpredictable snowfall, or local politics, and he'd respond with strategic nods, occasional grunts of acknowledgement, and laser-focused attention to his craft. The same unbreakable routine for 3 decades. Every morning at precisely 6:45, he'd arrive in his dented pickup truck, unlock the heavy metal door with keys that never jingled, flip on the fluorescent lights that hummed like distant helicopters, and arrange his tools with the kind of methodical preparation that spoke of muscle memory forged under pressure. At 7 sharp, his first customer would arrive. Usually old Jim, the retired police sergeant with stories from the 70s. Then Manuel at noon, the construction foreman with calloused hands and gentle eyes. Afternoons brought high school kids spending birthday money on fresh cuts. Evenings drew neighborhood men seeking quiet refuge from the world's chaos. None of them truly knew Tony Castellano. They could tell you he'd appeared in Denver sometime in 1994, had never married, raised no children, and lived alone in a sparse apartment on Colorado Boulevard. What they couldn't tell you was why his movements were so economical, why he never wasted motion, why his eyes constantly tracked the room's exits, or why conversations about foreign wars always ended abruptly. But there were signs, subtle indicators that careful observers might catch, like those hands. At 67, not even the faintest tremor when holding razor-sharp instruments near vulnerable throats. His grip on the straight razor was textbook perfect, the kind of control that comes from years of handling far more dangerous tools in far more dangerous places. Or his spatial awareness. When customers entered, Tony would first observe them through the mirror's reflection, cataloguing their posture, their energy, their potential threat level, before moving behind them. He never positioned himself in anyone's blind spot without maintaining multiple escape routes and sight lines, like someone trained to survive in environments where a moment's inattention meant death, and that distinctive silence. While customers talked, he absorbed information with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to extracting intelligence from casual conversation. When Vietnam War documentaries played on the small television, his face would go blank. When younger customers mentioned deployments to Afghanistan or Iraq, he'd redirect the conversation to safer topics like weather or sports. The neighborhood kids called him Silent Tony. Older residents referred to him respectfully as the Italian because of his surname. But nobody had ever asked about the years before Denver, and Tony had never volunteered that information. That particular Wednesday afternoon transformed everything. 2:30 p.m. on a raw March day. The kind of Colorado weather that cuts through jackets and settles into bones. Tony had just finished trimming old Jim's weekly cut, methodically cleaning his tools with the same attention to detail he'd learned in environments where equipment failure meant mission failure. A young man appeared at the door, silhouetted against the grey afternoon light. "You open?" The voice carried the distinct confidence of someone accustomed to military discipline. Tony nodded once, gestured toward the empty chair with economic precision. The young man entered, moving with the controlled energy of professional fitness. "I'm Marcus," he said, settling into the worn leather with perfect posture. "Heading to Fort Bragg next week, starting Ranger Assessment and Selection Program." Tony showed no reaction to the mention of RASP, one of the military's most challenging selection processes. Just asked, "Haircut and shave?" "Yes, sir." Tony began his work, starting with electric clippers that hummed efficiently through Marcus's regulation-length hair. The young man watched Tony's reflection in the mirror, initially seeing nothing more than an experienced barber performing familiar tasks. Steady hands, confident movements, professional technique. But then Tony began preparing for the wet shave, a service few barbershops still offered. He heated towels to perfect temperature, prepared foam with practiced efficiency, and began sharpening his straight razor on leather strop with rhythmic precision that spoke of decades of repetition. As Tony rolled up his sleeves to prevent foam stains, Marcus glimpsed what few customers had ever noticed. On the left forearm, a jagged scar ran from wrist toward elbow, so deep and old it must have required surgical intervention to heal properly. On the right arm, barely visible beneath the sleeve of his work shirt, was the faded edge of a tattoo. The ink was old, sun-bleached, but unmistakable in its military styling. When Tony applied hot towels to Marcus's face, the young man got a clearer view. The 75th Ranger Regiment insignia, weathered by time but still recognizable to anyone who knew what to look for. The kind of tattoo that wasn't chosen from a parlor wall, but earned through trials that broke most men who attempted them. Marcus's pulse quickened. The 75th Ranger Regiment represented the absolute elite of U.S. Army Special Operations, selection rates that made SEAL training look accessible, and this quiet barber, who'd been cutting hair in Denver for 30 years, carried their mark on his skin. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said quietly, his voice dropping to the respectful tone reserved for decorated veterans. "That tattoo on your arm, is that from the 75th? Tony's hand froze mid-stroke, the razor suspended in foam like a question mark. The shop fell silent except for the fluorescent light's electrical hum. 2 heartbeats. 3. Then Tony slowly placed the razor on the towel, turned to face Marcus directly, and for the first time they made full eye contact. "How do you know about the 75th?" Tony asked. Same measured tone, but now weighted with the authority of someone accustomed to asking questions that demanded honest answers. "I'm trying to earn my tab, sir." RASP starts in 3 weeks. Tony studied him with the assessing gaze of someone trained to evaluate human potential under extreme stress. Then he picked up the razor again, resumed the shave with steady strokes that spoke of absolute confidence in his own capabilities. "What year are you?" he asked. 2024, sir. RASP class 03-24. "No," Tony said with military directness. "What year was I there?" Marcus swallowed carefully around the sharp blade. "What years did you serve with the regiment, sir?" 1975 to 1991. 16 years. 3 companies, 2 battalions, 4 continents. The numbers hit Marcus like physical impacts. 16 years meant Tony had been there for everything. The final collapse of Vietnam, the Cold War's dangerous chess games, Grenada's surgical strike, Panama's night raids, and the Gulf War's desert campaigns. History book operations, led by men who became legends. "Which operations, sir?" Marcus asked with the reverence of someone requesting access to sacred knowledge. Tony completed another perfect razor stroke, wiped the blade clean, and continued working while he spoke. Each word was measured, precise, carrying the weight of classified memories. 1977 trained for Sunday prison raid follow-ups that never came. 1983 Grenada airfield seizure first wave. 1989 Panama Noriega extraction, close protection detail. 1991 Iraq, scud hunting behind enemy lines for 6 weeks. Each operation Marcus had studied in Ranger history courses, reading sanitized after-action reports that couldn't convey the reality of being there when history pivoted on the actions of small teams operating in absolute darkness. "What was your final rank, sir?" Staff Sergeant. Charlie Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion. Marcus felt his world expand. 2nd Battalion was legendary. Their operational tempo the stuff of whispered stories in modern Ranger barracks. And this man, who'd been there when the modern Special Operations template was being written in blood and sand, was now cutting hair for $15 in a Denver strip mall. "Sir, with respect, why—" Tony had finished the shave, had cleaned Marcus's face with warm towels, had turned the chair to face him directly. For 30 years, he'd deflected questions about his past. Now, something in this young man's respectful curiosity, his genuine desire to understand rather than simply be entertained, opened a door Tony thought he'd welded shut. "Why am I here instead of teaching at Benning or writing memoirs?" Tony sat on the chair's armrest, assuming the relaxed but alert posture of someone comfortable with command presence. "Because when the wars ended, they didn't end inside me. Some Rangers came home, started families, became coaches and teachers and businessmen. Some of us couldn't make that transition." Marcus listened with the complete attention of someone receiving instruction from a master craftsman. 1991, Iraqi desert, hunting mobile scud launchers. 8-man patrol, deep reconnaissance, no backup within 200 kilometers. We got compromised, took contact from a reinforced Iraqi patrol. 2 of us walked out. My battle buddy Danny was the other survivor. Tony paused, looking through the shop window at Denver traffic that bore no resemblance to the desert that still haunted his dreams. Danny made it home, married his high school sweetheart, tried to pretend the war had stayed in the desert. 6 months later, he ate his service pistol in his garage. PTSD wasn't even officially recognized then. They called it adjustment disorder, the weight of survivors' guilt, carried alone for 30 years, filled the space between them. I realized I couldn't pretend either, couldn't play civilian. So I came here, found work that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. Denver was far from everything I'd known, quiet enough to think, big enough to disappear. Marcus found his voice. "Do you regret leaving the regiment, sir?" For the first time in 3 decades, Tony smiled. Not the polite customer service expression he'd perfected, but something genuine and warm. "Son, Rangers don't retire. We just change our area of operations. You're about to face RASP. That makes you my mission now." What happened next transformed both their lives. Tony locked the shop door, hung the closed sign, and for the next 4 hours, provided Marcus with the kind of mentorship that money couldn't buy. Not just physical preparation techniques, but the mental frameworks that separate those who earn the tab from those who voluntarily withdraw. "RASP isn't designed to test your current capabilities," Tony explained, drawing on knowledge earned through 16 years of evaluating potential Rangers. "It's designed to reveal who you become when everything you thought you knew about yourself gets stripped away." He taught Marcus breathing techniques for managing pain, visualization methods for maintaining focus during sleep deprivation, and team leadership principles for moments when following orders conflicts with moral instincts. Most importantly, he broke down the Ranger Creed word by word, explaining the difference between memorizing text and living by principles that define your character under pressure. Recognizing that I volunteered as a ranger, fully knowing the hazards of my chosen profession, Tony began. That's not just acknowledgement. That's ownership. Every hardship you face, you chose. That makes you powerful, not victimized. I will never fail my comrades. His voice carried the authority of someone who tested that commitment in environments where failure meant death. Not just in combat, in training, in garrison, in civilian life. Rangers take care of rangers, always. As evening light faded to darkness, Tony removed his own watch, a battered Casio G-Shock that had survived 16 years of operations across 4 theatres. Half the functions no longer worked. The band was held together with electrical tape, but it still kept perfect time. This went everywhere with me, he said, fastening it around Marcus's wrist. Grenada beaches, Panama jungles, Iraqi desert. Let it remind you that precision matters, timing matters, and sometimes the most reliable things are the ones that look broken but refuse to quit. Marcus tried to protest, but Tony cut him off with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. You earn the tab, you find me afterward. Rangers always find each other. They shook hands like equals, veteran to future veteran, and Marcus walked into the Denver night carrying more than just tactical knowledge. He carried the confidence that comes from being chosen, tested and deemed worthy by someone whose opinion mattered more than ranks or ribbons. 8 weeks later, Tony found an envelope slipped under his shop door. Inside, a graduation photo showing 12 exhausted but triumphant soldiers wearing tan berets, and a note written in precise handwriting. Sergeant Castellano. Made it through RASP. 180 started, 12 graduated. Your watch never stopped, and neither did I. Assigned to 3rd Ranger Battalion. Rangers lead the way. Ranger Marcus Thompson, 75th Regiment. Tony hung the photo on his shop wall, the first personal item he'd displayed in 30 years. That afternoon, he called Fort Carson's Veteran Liaison Office and volunteered for their mentorship program. Some stories end. Others just change chapters. Tony Castellano had spent 30 years believing his war was over. That Wednesday afternoon, he learned that his most important mission was just beginning, ensuring the next generation of Rangers understood that the tab on their shoulder was more than decoration. It was a promise to carry forward the legacy of those who came before. In the human ledger, every life has meaning, every story matters, and every quiet hero deserves to be remembered. Tony's barbershop still operates on 32nd Avenue, but now it serves as more than just a place for haircuts. It's where young soldiers learn that true strength isn't about what you can lift. It's about what you can carry. So tell us, have you ever met someone like Tony? Someone whose quiet competence hinted at extraordinary experiences they never discussed? Share their story in the comments, because in our ledger, silent heroes get the recognition they never sought but always deserved. Subscribe to the Human Ledger and help us preserve the stories that matter most. The ones that remind us that greatness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up, does the work, and changes lives one conversation at a time.